Thanks for clicking on the video. Today's video is going to show you how to put Ubuntu 14.04 LTS on your computer and make it the sole operating system. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do some post-installation things to make your system usable, and it's going to be a procedure that will make sure that you end up with a system that you actually want to use, and it will do what you need it to do, okay? So first, let's talk about system requirements. I know a lot of folks want to get rid of that XP installation on their machine and move on to a new operating system. Ubuntu is a great alternative for that if you don't want to shell out a whole bunch of money for a new computer. And this is a great way to go, and Ubuntu will run on pretty much any machine that would run Windows XP. You need 700 megahertz processor at least, Intel Celeron or better. 1 gigabyte of RAM. Ubuntu claims that you can run it on 512 megabytes, but my personal experience is that if you actually try and do that, you're going to bang your head up against a wall because it's going to be so slow. 20 gigabytes of hard drive space for the operating system. Now, the actual size of the Ubuntu operating system is like 8 gigs once it's installed. However, you're going to want to install software, and you're going to be doing updates, and you want to give the operating system some room to breathe. Most Windows XP machines, the earlier models, shipped with 40 gigabyte hard drives. That's plenty as long as you don't load the hard drive up with a bunch of, music and videos that are going to take up space. You need to have at least 20 gigabytes free for the system to breathe. VGA 1024 by 768, most XP machines were able to do that. DVD drive in the machine. It has to be able to read, and it has to be able to boot. You don't have to necessarily be able to write DVDs in the machine. You need to have an internet connection to the machine. You're going to have some time to do the install. That's going to take, the install can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2.5 hours. It depends on your internet connection, and it depends on how fast your machine is and whether everything goes, all right the first time around. And the last thing that you want to do is boot Ubuntu from your live DVD and test out your hardware. Now, what's going to happen is that you will put your Ubuntu installation in the DVD drive, and you will get it to boot, and this is the screen that you will come up to. It will take time to get to this screen. As a matter of fact, it can take 3 to 4 minutes for Ubuntu to boot up completely. That is normal, and as long as it's crunching and the machine doesn't lock up, you're okay and you're there. But once it gets booted up, it's going to show you this screen. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try Ubuntu, because we need to make sure that it's going to work on our computer before we actually install the system, which is one of the nice things about Linux. You can't do this with Windows. You install it and okay, let's see if it works. Linux will give you a functioning operating system from the DVD. It's all loaded into memory. So any changes that you make here, like when you're goofing around, they're not going to stick. When you shut it down, they're all going to go away. But the whole point of this is to give you a way to test your system and make sure that everything is working properly. So while that boots, let's get into the installation process itself. We'll move to the next thing here, which actually there's not too much to do, because what we're going to do is use the installer program to create partitions, and we're going to create a user account. So I'll show you how to do that here. Now, once it gets booted up, this is the screen that you're going to see, and you have a functioning Ubuntu system. And you can click on any of these icons over here and launch programs. You can change system settings, and it'll all do it. Now, it's going to be very, very slow, even if you're using a USB stick to do this, because it just takes a long time to read from the installer media, the live environment, especially if you're using a DVD and it's a slower machine. So don't be surprised if it takes a while. Now, while you're here, you're going to want to make sure that everything works, that you've got your mouse, and maybe launch a Firefox and play a YouTube video. Make sure you can see a YouTube video. You can also here, the most important thing to do, of course, is to make sure your internet is working. If you have a wired connection, it should hook right up, not a problem. If you have a wireless connection, it will offer you the chance to, connect to a network. If it doesn't, and if it's not working, all hope is not lost. Sometimes you need to install drivers for your wireless card, especially if you have like Broadcom drivers, something like that, a little bit different. And a lot of the times you'll have to install the system first and then check additional drivers, and then you can get your wireless to work. So you can take an Ethernet cable and plug the computer directly in your router, and you can boot it up, and you've got a pretty good chance that you'll be able to take care of that wireless issue later. If you can't, you can't. The driver situation in Linux is a little bit different than Windows. It either works when you boot it up or it doesn't. It's that simple. As far as printers are concerned, if you have an HP printer, it should work out of the box. It will recognize it immediately. If you have another brand, you may or may not be able to get drivers for Linux. If it's a really old printer, let it go. You can get a new HP printer for not a whole lot of cash. You can have the latest printer, and you have the latest drivers for that, and you don't have to tinker with it. So anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves with drivers. So we're going to assume that you've got your internet hooked up, you're all good to go, and you're going to want to get into installing the software here. So what you want to do is click on Install Ubuntu 14.04 LTS. Now this will take a while to load, so this is one of those times when you can take a sip off your beverage. Alright, we're here. And we're going to follow the process here, so follow along carefully. First thing it's going to ask you is about your language, and we're going to assume that you speak English. If you don't, pick the one that works for you. That simple. And then we're going to come to this screen, and it's going to make sure that you have enough hard drive space. See, I think, what do they say here? That you need 6.5 gigabytes at least to install. 20 gigs, babe, you gotta have it. And an internet connection. Updates, we're gonna take care of that later. So we're gonna make the install software process and make the install software not have to work too hard. We just want to get the system on the machine, and then we'll take care of that stuff. So go ahead and click ahead without clicking those boxes. The next thing it's going to do is offer us a partitioning scheme for our computer. And the first one that comes up is erase Ubuntu, erase the hard drive, and install. Well, that's what we're doing in this video. However, we're going to do it a little bit of a different way. If you don't get what I talk about next and you think I'll never be able to do that and you just want Ubuntu to run, choose the top option here, okay? But I'm going to show you how to do this in such a way that if you should ever decide that you want to upgrade your Ubuntu installation, or you want to try a different version of Linux, let's say that you want to do Linux Mint, or you want to do something else, there's a way that you can do this and preserve all of your settings and files and make that process quite easy. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We are going to choose something else. And it's going to come up here, and if you have Windows installed on the machine, when we get to this partition, you're going to see your Windows partitions, and you will need to click on them and delete them. We want to get to a place where we have no partition table at all. So we're going to click New Partition Table, and that's going to blow everything off the machine. That's okay. That's what we want to do. And it shows us all of this lovely free space. So we want to create a partition, and all we got to do is click plus, and we are going to choose to make a 20 gigabyte, or rather 30 gigabyte space here. So it'll be 30 and 3 zeros. And this is going to be where the operating system itself lives. It has to be primary. We want it at the beginning of the space. We want the ext4 file system, and we're going to set the mount point to the slash, because the Linux operating system always lives in the slash. It's the root of the file system, and this is where the file system begins, and it's just represented by a slash. So we're going to create our slash partition. And this is where our operating system is going to go. And it's ready to go. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a swap partition. Now, those of you who run Windows may be familiar with the concept of a swap file, which is where the computer goes when it needs extra memory. In Linux, we give the system a partition to work with. We're going to create that now. And we're going to go ahead and make this primary because we're going to assume that we're going to use all the hard drive space anyway, so we don't need to make a logical drive out of this. So we do that, and then we choose swap from this list. And there we go, swap. And that's all you need to do, but we do need to give it some space and tell it how big, right? So what we're going to do is choose the size of our swap file, our swap partition. How do you do that? Well, generally speaking, you want to make it the size of your memory plus a little bit more. So if you have 4 gigs of memory on your computer, you want to make it a 5 gig space. Why? Well, because if the computer ever wants to hibernate, this is where it's going to store the information when the computer goes into hibernation. And it needs to be the size of the memory and a little bit bigger to do that. If you're never going to hibernate, then you could make it a smaller size, like 2 gigs or something like that. If you have like 16 gigs of RAM in your machine, some people will say, do I need to create a swap partition at all? Well, technically you don't, especially if you're never going to hibernate it, but I have found that most operating systems, Windows and Linux included, don't like not having a swap file. So you have to create something. So I would give it like 2 gigs or something like that, as long as you knew that you were never going to hibernate. But a rule of thumb would be to give it the size of the memory plus like maybe 1 gig, okay? In our case, our machine has 1.5 gigs of memory in it, so I'm going to make this a 2 gigabyte space for swap. Now, it's not exactly 2 gigabytes. It'll come up a little bit less, but that's good enough, right? Okay, so now we have all of this free space, and here is where we're going to put our files, like our home partition, in our home partition, like we're going to put all of our music, videos, documents, all of the settings for our machine are going to go into this partition. And since we are never going to remove this partition, when we upgrade or reinstall, everything is still going to be there. And all you do is go through the same procedure I'm doing now, but choose not to format this partition, and all of your settings will just magically reappear, okay? So we're going to go ahead and create another partition for that. We'll make it primary. We want to use the rest of the disk, ext4 file system, and we want to make this the home partition. And so that's done right there. And we are going to format it since this is the first time around. If we were reinstalling or installing a different version of Linux, we would choose not to format that. Time to move on. Now, once you click that button and you set this in stone that this is going to install, guess what? That's when all of your data gets wiped off. So you're going to want to make sure that you've had everything all backed up because your installation is gone. Now we'll choose our time zone. Where are you? Well, just click on the map wherever you are in the world. New York City, so that works out fine for me. Here's where you'll choose your keyboard layout. If you are using an English US keyboard, you're good to go. That's the default. If not, you can choose from the list, or you can have the system detect the keyboard for you. But since we are using US English, we're good to go. Next thing. And we're coming up to a screen here that's going to make us have to make some decisions. First of all, we want to put our name in there. Your real name. I'm going to put my real name in there. Alright. Once you put your name in, it's going to suggest a name for your machine. In this case, it's saying Joe Virtual Machine. I'm just going to call this Joe Ubuntu. Really doesn't matter what you choose for this name, except it should pretty much be in lowercase letters, and you can use the characters 1 through 9, no zeros. It won't like it. So we're going to call it Joe Ubuntu. That name already exists. I must have created one like that before on my network. Username is Joe. You can put anything here that you like, as long as it's all lowercase letters with no spaces, and make it short, something you're going to remember, okay? Here is where you're going to select a password, and I'm going to put a password in here. Oop, I don't know why it bogged down a little bit. Wouldn't let me type it in for a second. Alright, so I'm going to put something really stupid in here just because this is an example, but for your password, you need to choose a good strong password. It doesn't like this one because it's very weak. It's very weak. And here it's going to ask us whether we want to log in automatically or allow the system to ask us. And I always, on any Linux system, go ahead and use the option where the system asks me for the password at login. And I'll tell you why. Not only is it more secure, especially if you have a laptop, you don't want people just getting into your computer, but it also gives the system your password at login, so it won't ask for it the next time you click on something. If you just automatically log in, if you click on anything, the system is going to ask for the password anyway, so just give it to it up front. I've seen that happen more than once. Down here it's going to ask whether you want to encrypt your home folder. Well, I personally don't do that because it negates what we did when we created our own partitions. If you encrypt the home folder and you reinstall the operating system on top of it, then what's going to happen is the new operating system will not be able to read your home folder because it won't have the encryption key. Now, yes, it's safer because people can't get into your machine with a boot disk and read your files, but it kind of negates that whole process that we did for creating our own home partition. So you can choose that if you want to. Now, if you decided to not create a separate home partition in the first process that I showed you when we were partitioning, and you have a very small hard drive, let's say, and it's just not worth it to divide it up. You've got like maybe a 40 gigabyte hard drive. You want everything all in the root partition, so you just chose the erase everything option. Then it doesn't matter. You can encrypt it if you want to, because you can't reinstall it without reinstalling everything anyway. So we've got that done. So you click continue. Now the system has actually been installing in the background the whole time we were talking about this and going through the process of creating our user account and all that. And so what it's going to do here when it gets itself together is it's going to switch over to a slideshow that it's going to show us while it installs the system. And don't freak out if it takes a little while to get to that process. It's just doing its stuff in the background that it needs to do. And as soon as it switches over and shows us the little slideshow, we will actually pause the video, and I will pick up when the system is done installing. See, look, it's already copying the files. Now it's going to go out on the internet, it's going to get some stuff. This may take your computer anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours to do, depending on a lot of things. So we're just going to walk away from it. We're going to leave it alone and let it do its thing. And through the magic of editing, we're going to pick up at the screen you get when it's done with the install. The install is complete, and this is what you're going to see. It's going to prompt you to restart your computer. So we're going to do that right now. And it's going to go through and shut things down. Remember, we are still working at DVD or USB stick speed, so everything takes time. Ubuntu is actually a very fast operating system once you get it installed and it's running off the hard drive. But if you go by the live environment, it'll fool you, that's for sure. So here we go. And it's going to shut itself down. I'm listening to the DVD drive crunch, crunch, crunch. And then it's going to ask me to press enter. When I do, it ejects the DVD. Take that out and put it in its case. Put that to the side in case you need to reinstall later, or you want to do it on your friend's machine, because I'm sure that you will love Ubuntu so much that you'll want to share it with everybody. And by the way, that's perfectly okay in the Linux world. As a matter of fact, we encourage it. You can share Ubuntu with whoever you like. This. And we put in our password. And we will get our first look at the Ubuntu desktop. Running, by the way, off the hard drive this time around. We're not running from any live environment. So if you get this far, it's pretty safe to say that it's going to work just fine. All right, before we do anything, let me make this screen just a touch bigger, because if I don't, we're going to get things cut off. Let's see what we got here. Let's try 1024 by 768. And I will just hit enter for that to be okay. There we go. Keep the configuration, please. And go ahead and center that. Of course, it will come up to whatever the native resolution of your monitor is when you first do it. This is being done on a virtual machine, and the default for that is 800 by 600. So we'll make it a little bit bigger. Now that we have Ubuntu installed and we know that it's running, we have a few things that we can do to just get the system polished up and install a few things. So the very first thing that we're going to want to do, this is a feature in Ubuntu that I don't like, and most people who use it don't, so we want to get rid of it. And that is that when you go to the to the dash, which is up here, what it wants to do is it wants to search the internet and Amazon.com for whatever you type in, and that's something that is kind of a pain, and it's slow, and it comes up with weird search results. So my recommendation is to turn that off, and that way you're not going to get that search happening. Now that that's done, before we do anything else to the system, before we install software, think about installing software, whatever the deal is, we want to make sure that the system is up to date. And the software updater will automatically come up. It is right there. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to install all of the updates. Before we do anything else to the system, we want to install updates. It will ask for your password to do this, because it's going to probably install some very system-sensitive components, like a new Linux kernel and things like that. And for those sorts of updates, you will need to give permission, and you will need to reboot the system. So let's see what it is doing. It is currently downloading the packages, and it will go through and download these packages, and it will install them. And so I'm going to pause the video once again. Once the update process is complete, we will get into the next step. This will take a little while to do, depending on how many updates you need for your system. Ubuntu releases new image files once every now and again that are more up to date. But if you should happen to get one that is a little bit old, and then you run updates, you may have to update a lot of stuff. So we're just going to let this run, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. When it's all through updating, this is what you're going to see. It's going to prompt you to restart the computer, and that is so some of the updates can take effect. This doesn't happen very often in Ubuntu, that updates are installed and you have to restart. Just when you're reinstalling things like the kernel, and we're going to do that right now, so we'll tell the system to go ahead and restart itself. And you will see that it actually works a lot faster now that we're running off of the hard drive. The next thing we're going to do is actually optional. You do not have to do this if you don't want to. But there are some programs that you're going to want to install to make Ubuntu functional. You want to be able to play an MP3, and you want to be able to watch YouTube videos with Flash Player. You're going to need these programs. Plus, you're going to need codecs for watching other kinds of videos, things like that. So we're going to go and get those. The first thing that we need to do is go to System Settings. Down here at the bottom, you'll see Software and Updates. Give that a click. And here is where we set our repositories. And we want to click Canonical Partners. And yes, it will ask for the password to make sure that we have authorization to do this. And I want to make sure that that is highlighted. And close that. It will want to reload the repository, so we're going to let it go ahead and do that. And this will take just a second. While you're here, too, you can look at your update settings, things like that, and make sure that it's set up the way you want it to. Pretty much the default settings work just fine. It'll nag you about once a week for updates if there are any important security updates. Also, while we're here, we're going to take a look at additional drivers. Matter of fact, let me go to my notes very quickly here so I make sure that I'm doing this in the right order. Okay, yeah, actually, we're going to do the additional drivers while we're here. And so I got that slightly out of order, but it really does not matter. So what we want to do is go ahead and reopen that. And we'll open additional drivers. Now, for my situation on this machine, it's not going to find any additional drivers because there are none available to me, simply because this is running in a virtual environment. You have drivers for your video card that you would like to install and give those a try. This is where you would do it. Also, if we couldn't get that wireless connection to work earlier on, this is where we would get that wireless connection to work. And we would set it up here. Okay. Now, as far as video drivers are concerned, if you have NVIDIA drivers in your machine, Intel drivers, you're probably going to want to use the proprietary version. That'll give you the best performance. If you have AMD drivers in your machine, older AMD drivers, chances are with 1404 you're not going to have drivers available. If you do have drivers available for your AMD card, then I would say forget it and stay with the open source drivers. The difference here is that the proprietary drivers are provided by the manufacturer, which means that the Ubuntu developers cannot get into the source code and they can't update them. Whereas the open source version of the drivers, which come installed by default, they can be improved over time, and updates may improve those drivers. Whichever one works best for you. I'm not going to stand on ethical principles about everything being open source, especially with the next things we're going to do here, because we're actually going to go get us some proprietary software that makes it a lot easier to run Ubuntu and get things done. So let's go ahead and scroll down here, and the first thing that we want to do is get our goodies. We got several pieces of software here that are going to help us along quite a bit. We'll do that from a terminal. By the way, this falls under Linux software management. All I'm going to do now that I have my terminal up and running, and by the way, I hit alternate tab and T to get that terminal up. I'm going to paste this command in quotes into the terminal. And when we run this command, it's going to go out and get some software for the machine, part of which is the part that we skipped during the installation where it said install third-party software. We're going to make sure that we have all our codecs plus some other goodies. So once you get there, just hit the enter key, put in your password, and the machine is going to go out and get the packages to install. So here's everything that it needs. So we'll go ahead and say yes. And it's going to go out to the internet and install all of those packages for us and make sure that they're in there. Assuming everything went well, you will come up to this screen. This is part of the Ubuntu Restricted Extras package, and it wants to install some fonts on your computer. And So what you'll need to do is agree to this license. This has actually been a trip up for some folks who have tried to install this. They get a little bit confused, and it's very important that we give it the right information. When this screen comes up, you will press the Tab key to select OK, and then hit Enter, and then Yes, and it will go out and continue installing all of the software that we have coming to us from the Ubuntu Restricted Extras package, and it will also get those extra packages that I put in there. Next, we're going to install Java on the machine. For legal reasons, Ubuntu Linux does not ship with any sort of Java, and there are two versions. There's one called Ice-T, which is an open source version of Java. Now, that will come pre-installed automatically on Linux Mint and some other systems. Ubuntu just doesn't install anything, and so you'll need to go get Java. I prefer to use the actual Oracle version of Java and not the Ice-T. It's more compatible, especially if you like to play online games. So we're going to go ahead and install that on the system when the system gets done installing the other things that it's installing now. And you can get your Java on. All right, we are done. Our installation is complete of all of those goodies, and next we will move on to putting Java on the machine. And first we need to add the PPA, and we do that by copying and pasting this command into the terminal. Copy. Now what this is going to do is it's going to tell Ubuntu that we'd like to put the PPA into the system. And it's going to go out and it's going to find the PPA, and we say enter, yes, and it's in the system. But we can't install the software yet because it doesn't know the software is there. So we will use the next command on the list. Let me deal with that later. That was just an error message that came up, but it probably had to do with the install. We can clear that out. While this was doing this and the video was not being recorded, I actually had my internet drop out, which is the way things go when you're trying to do things and somebody's watching, right? So we're going to paste in the update command. This will go out and find all of our software and make sure that it knows where everything is. And while it's doing that, we can go ahead and get the next command, which will be the command to actually install the Java plugin. And we will do this again. Just put that command in there and turn it loose. Yes, we want the plugin. And once again, we're going to have a license agreement to deal with. This time we don't have to press tab. We just say OK. And we select yes. And the machine will go out and it will download Java. And once it is done, no restart necessary at this point, your Ubuntu system is set up and ready to go. And first place you might want to go after getting through all of this process is to go into your settings, set your screen locker. How long do you do you want the machine to suspend? That's under power. And just have fun with Ubuntu. It's a very fun operating system, and I'm sure that you're going to like it. If you've never done it before, it's a voyage of discovery. So I would suggest that now that you are actually running the system, that you spend some time on YouTube and watch some videos and take your time with it. If you approach Linux too quickly, you're going to get very frustrated. And if you do run into a problem, Mr. Google is your friend. Google out your problem, and chances are somebody out there has run into it. And join the Ubuntu wiki, where all of the different, the user group, become a part of it. Open source software is a community. Be a part of that community. And once you get the hang of using Linux and you understand it, you will, no doubt, especially if you were a Windows Power user, come to the conclusion that this is a much better system anyway, and great ideas. So anyway, thanks for watching this rather expansive video.